Jade, over to you. Where are you exactly?
Yeah, I'm in Izium, which is in Kharkiv region. It's about 2.5 hours drive towards Donbass. So, this is the Siversky Donetsk River. It's just out the shot. I can show it to you in a minute. And the city and some of the ruined buildings behind me.
Ah, yes, we can see them. Remind us, Jade, what took place there?
So Izium was under occupation from early March 2022 until it was liberated on September 9th, 2022, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm actually standing specifically on a bridge, which is a bridge where people tried to kind of flee the city, or even just get from one part of the city to a perceived safer part of the city. Because you have to remember, there's not any kind of the mobile network was at best patchy and then completely disappeared. People, you're just panicking and working on rumors. Some parts of the city went very hungry because there wasn't particularly those who lived in flats who didn't have this kind of vegetable gardens. And in this particular bridge, people tried to cross from one side of the city over the Siversky Donetsk River to the other, and the Russians shot them. So there were a lot of corpses.
Izium was one of the sites, if I recall, where many bodies were excavated. Do we know numbers, Jade, of those that were exhumed then?
To be honest, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, and viewers and listeners will have to excuse me a little bit because I've been speaking all day to people who lived under occupation, so I'm a little bit not on top of my game because obviously they're pretty horrible conversations. From memory, the people found in those particular mass graves, it was in the hundreds, but I think we're talking about much larger numbers, as we saw as we've heard of, in Mariupol. Many people just buried loved ones somewhere, under blankets, kind of in makeshift graves. And then, there are also bodies that will just probably never be found.
What kind of things, Jade, before we turn to the updates and other subjects, are they saying to you there that you've spoken to this morning?
There's one really horrible story there are so many horrible stories, but there's one story of a man who was a kind of friendly neighbour, I suppose, and he was a really lovely guy, pretty successful, he had a nice car, but maybe his risk calculus was a bit off, and he really loved the Ukrainian national anthem, which, to be honest, I also really love. I think it's such a beautiful, I love the words. But of course, he's Ukrainian and then came to be living under occupation. So he really, really loved it in a way that, an English woman is not going to understand. And he listened to it at home in the privacy of his own apartment. And a neighbour told on him. And then the next series of events aren't particularly clear, except for that the FSB came to his home, or perhaps the military police. There's different versions. And then he was discovered hanged for listening to the anthem in his own personal space. That story stays with me. Just, I think, because of, we talk about the resistance on here, and I do try to talk about just how risky it is, but just stories like that, they really bring it home to you, like the incredible bravery of what people are doing, but also just the consequences, and also, a lot of the stories were just about how the Russians stole absolutely everything, like sweets that they'd got for kids, just stole everything. There was a picture of a washing machine on a stretcher for injured soldiers that they showed me, and then they sarcastically said, "Oh, poor guys, they didn't manage to carry it off in time." So somehow, remarkably, despite living through some really terrible things, this group of people, some of whom were, taken by the FSB, and then because it was close to liberation, were still alive, I guess. They still managed to keep their sense of humour, an admittedly very dark humour, but seems to me a very Ukrainian trait, to be able to make jokes like that.
Yeah, you talk about the risk there, Jade, and we've just published an interview with one of the leaders of the Ukrainian resistance in Mariupol, and he said something very telling where when Dom asked him about the risks for anybody caught doing any resistance activity, he said death at a minimum. And I mean, what a way of putting it, right? Because there are implications for other people as well as your own life involved in this. And I just wonder if you could perhaps comment on the Mariupol resistance. You've obviously talked about that a lot.
Yes. I mean, of course, I can't go to Mariupol. You know, there's no way for me to kind of ever understand, and with the greatest apologies to those people, I hope there's never any way for me to understand what they've been through and what they're going through and what it must take. The fact that we have so much information about Mariupol, the fact that we're able to see so many of the things that are done, the fact that we have images of the mass graves, you know, the pits and the pits and the pits of bodies lying on top of bodies stretching on for ages. That's all because of the work of the people in Mariupol who are part of that network, and to Petro's incredible leadership of that network on the other side, and keeping those people there safe.
Well, Jade, I'm aware that your time is very precious, particularly when you're out in the field as you are today. So perhaps we can go into the updates.
Yeah, so let's go on to the updates of the resistance going from the 9th of April 2026 to the 22nd of April 2026. So there were 15 confirmed operations, and carrying on from what I said about last week, just to clarify, there were 6 of them that happened in the occupied territories and 9 of them that happened in Russia, in the Russian Federation. So we're seeing this continuation of them conducting activities of movements from the occupied territories, or Ukrainian underground figures carrying out activities inside the Russian Federation, which must, I imagine, for the Russians be a rather unintended consequence of passportization. Forcing everybody to take a Russian passport has its downsides for everybody, it would appear. So the main pattern was the deliberate pressure on the systems that allow Russia to hold and use occupied territory, power supply, railway support, communications, local mobility, and the most active regions in this period were the Luhansk region, the Zaporizhia region, where also we've seen, you know, the Ukrainian special forces, the SOF or SSO, you know, providing some incredible footage in recent days and weeks of all of their attacks that are clearly designed, you know, into occupied Zaporizhia and surrounding areas that are clearly designed to stop any Russian advance in around Kuliaipole and that area. So if we focus first on Zaporizhia, Melitopol stands out as one of the clearest pressure points. So there were 2 separate incidents, one on the 9th of April and one on the 14th of April, both of which involved substations. Why a substation? Because obviously it matters beyond the immediate technical damage. It interrupts electricity supply, creates pressure on local occupation systems, and complicates military and occupation routines. The repeated attacks that we're seeing on substations suggest an effort to stress both the occupation administration itself and military support by targeting a shared system. In Luhansk, on 18th of April, a sabotage action hit an electrical substation in the city of Luhansk, with the reported destruction of a transformer that powers the railway supply hub. It's quite difficult to replace a transformer. It's not something you can quickly fix. In Luhansk, the destruction of the transformer is not something that could be easily replaced. So the strike has effects beyond the immediate site. It delays repair cycles, disrupts some rail movement, and obviously Russia very dependent on the rail for supply chains. And then on the 20th of April, another case in the Luhansk region involved the burning of a vehicle, so like a traditional one, burning of a vehicle that belonged to a Russian occupier. So slightly different tactical form. In occupied Crimea, on the 11th of April, there was, again, this is a bit of a kind of golden oldie from our updates, if you will. There was a railway relay cabinet that was, sorry, my hands are so cold. There was a railway relay cabinet, so the railway signalling infrastructure was hit near Sevastopol, and on 16th of April there was a communications tower was burned in the Krasnogvardeysk district. So in Crimea the focus has been much more on the technical architecture that supports movement, control and communication, and again in Crimea and in Krasnodar region inside Russian Federation we've been seeing again a lot of attacks by the SOF. So those attacks as well, is interesting to note, particularly given your interview with Petro, that, you know, these are attacks that have an impact on the communication infrastructure, and Mariupol resistance, recently have conducted a number of quite communications or data-driven attacks that they've reported publicly. And so, just when we often talk about other topics like the repressiveness of the regime, and clearly, a huge part of that is controlling the information infrastructure, controlling the communication system. Russia has essentially total control over the occupied territories in terms of its surveillance mechanisms and information, not total, but near total. And, being able to destroy that, being able to kind of destroy those points is also important, for other reasons beyond just direct military relevance.
Well, thank you very much, Jade, for talking us through those, and for Ilya, as ever, for his assistance in compiling those updates. Always, Ilya. Thank you. And just before you go, Jade, I know it's it's very cold where you are,
really
so
cold, sorry.
I feel guilty asking any more questions. But one more, if I may. Before we came on air, you were just mentioning religious persecution, and I just wonder if it's not a theme that we've talked about very much when we've focused on the occupied territories. But perhaps you could just say a word about that before you go.
Yes, of course. So it's funny. Well, not. Nothing I say is funny, I think, on these things, but it just so happens that we've been preparing we've been gathering a lot of, because there's quite a lot of data, but it's in different places, and then you need to check it against other sources and things like this, and one's own kind of field work and interviews. But we managed to bring it all together and to get some kind of hard statistics. So since obviously the suppression of different religious communities who are not the Moscow Patriarchate version of the Orthodox Church, has been happening in occupied territory since 2014, but there's a massive, a dramatic acceleration after February 2022, even in those areas under occupation since 2014. For the evangelical Christians, including Pentecostals, there were 366 communities in Donetsk region, so just over there. Before 2014, 95% of those have now been destroyed. Of those 366 communities, they no longer exist. Baptist communities, again, there were approximately 186. Now, only, again, 95% of them are wiped out. Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Kiev Patriarchate, won't come as a surprise. 100% destroyed, so not even allowed a nominal sort of representation. There were 86 such communities in occupied Donbass. Jehovah's Witnesses, who are of course deemed extremist and illegal under Russian law, again reduced by 100%. There were 83 communities. The Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, which is a sort of, well, it's basically a Catholic church, but there's a long kind of historical reason why it's the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church that I'm too cold to explain in any way that does it justice.
Another episode, Jade, another episode.
And in my defense, I can hear artillery, so please, again, listeners, I beg for your forgiveness. There were 49 communities and 100% of them, so there's not a single active Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church that remains in occupied Donetsk, even by 2018. So this actually even happened before 2022. And of the Seventh-day Adventists, who are quite, I don't know. I don't think I've met that many Seventh-day Adventists in Britain, for example. But I've met quite a few here, and obviously that's only anecdotal. But there were 36 communities. And 90% reduction. So there's just some statistics to kind of show how much essentially we're talking about the total wipeout of alternative religious communities in the Christian. We focused on Christian denominations.
Really important as well, because as you say and allude to there, Jade, this is used often as a weapon, particularly in the United States, by those who are more pro-Russian in inclination, shall we say. They say, well, Russia is protecting Christianity and orthodoxy, and actually they're eradicating it.
And the irony is, of course, that many of these denominations are the same denominations of those people in the US. I mean, it would be one thing if those people in the US belonged to the Moscow Patriarchate, but often they themselves are Pentecostals or evangelicals, and, what happens. And I have to say as well, of course, like everything, it's much harsher in the occupied territories, the repression. But I remember writing a report about the repression against Protestants in 2020 that was happening inside the Russian Federation. So, they don't even have to go, if their dislike for Ukraine is so strong, then Ukraine, they can just look at what happens in Russia itself.
Well, Jade, thank you so much for your time today. Do stay safe out there, and we'll let you go so that you can go and find somewhere to get warm.
I'm going to find some hot chocolate.
Yeah, absolutely.